Why would someone already serving a life sentence risk losing the only connection they have to the outside world? What could possibly happen behind prison walls that would make officials take such a drastic step? And what if everything you've heard about Mackenzie Shirilla's visitation ban barely scratches the surface? For days, people have been arguing over the punishment, but almost nobody is asking the one question that changes everything. What really happened to make prison officials decide enough was enough? The answer isn't hidden in rumors or social media. It lies inside records that tell a very different story. Stay with me, because once you see the complete timeline and the details most people have overlooked, you'll understand why this case has become far more disturbing than anyone expected. She was caught on camera exposing herself during a monitored prison video call, and the visitor on the other end of the screen was completely undressed and using a sex toy. That single act cost Mackenzie Shirilla 60 days of video visitation privileges. But it may have cost her something far more valuable. Every violation goes into her permanent conduct file, and when the parole board reviews her case in 2037, that file could be the reason she never walks free. While her mother pleads for innocence online, painting a picture of a quiet, misunderstood young woman trapped in a harsh system, the official records from the Ohio Reformatory for Women tell a completely different story. They document a pattern of contraband, unauthorized video visits, and repeated rule violations that began emerging after her arrival. The question is not whether she broke the rules. The question is why a convicted double murderer with decades ahead of her behind bars would systematically destroy the few comforts she has left. If you want the unfiltered truth behind the headlines, hit like and subscribe to CrimeDive Network right now. Before we pull apart what is happening inside that prison, we have to remember why she is there in the first place. At the center of this case are two young men who never made it home. Dominic Russo was 20 years old. Davion Flanagan was 19. They had families who loved them, friends who looked up to them. On July 30th to 1st, 2022, just after 5:30 in the morning, both of them were dead. Mackenzie Shirilla was behind the wheel of her Toyota Camry. Dominic was in the passenger seat. Davion was in the back. Shirilla was 17 years old. She drove down Progress Drive in Strongsville, Ohio, a narrow commercial road with curves and a 35-mile-per-hour speed limit. The event data recorder inside her vehicle told investigators a story that her defense team would spend the entire trial trying to explain away. The accelerator was pressed to the floor at 100% throttle for at least 5 full seconds. The car reached approximately 100 miles per hour. There was no braking. None. The vehicle went airborne at an intersection, struck an industrial sign, and slammed into a brick wall. Dominic and Davion were pronounced dead at the scene. Shirilla survived with serious injuries. Her defense attorneys argued it was a medical emergency. They claimed she suffered from an undiagnosed condition that caused her to black out completely, leaving her with zero memory of the moments before impact. But the prosecution presented evidence that painted a very different picture. Investigators testified that the car was manually shifted between neutral and drive in the final seconds before impact. A hard steering event to the right occurred just before the crash, suggesting a conscious hand on the wheel navigating the curve. Less than a month before the fatal crash, a witness heard Shirilla threaten to crash a car with Dominic inside it. Videos from July 2022 showed her threatening Dominic during arguments. In August 2023, Judge Nancy Margaret Russo presided over a bench trial and delivered a verdict that left no room for interpretation. She found Shirilla guilty on all 12 counts. She called the act controlled, methodical, deliberate, intentional, and purposeful. She sentenced her to 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life in prison. Parole eligibility is set for October 2037. The judge had a phrase for what she saw in the evidence. She called it hell on wheels. But the records show that Shirilla did not settle into quiet incarceration. Instead, A documented pattern of institutional violations began to emerge. During a September 2024 search, guards found 29 bottles of paint, craft supplies, jewelry charms, a large stack of what staff described as monopoly money, and handwritten notes listing prices for homemade bracelets and earrings. The following month, another search turned up altered state-issued pants, a fan believed to belong to another inmate, and 4 nude magazine pictures. By January 2025, guards had found medication not prescribed to her and a personal photo that staff described as containing drug use. Shirilla claimed the pills were prenatal vitamins and denied the characterization of the photo. Then in April 2025, investigators discovered she had conducted over 100 video visits with a person who was not an approved visitor, using another name to bypass the system. That visitor was a released ex-inmate. She pleaded guilty and received a 30-day electronics restriction. The violation that brought the most serious consequence came in September 2025. During a monitored video visit, Shirilla exposed her breast to the camera. The visitor on the other end appeared completely undressed and displayed a sex toy. There were 7 documented video visits between Shirilla and that same visitor. She pleaded guilty. The hearing officer imposed a 60-day restriction on all video visiting. In a maximum security facility, explicit conduct on monitored calls is treated as a serious security violation because the risks extend far beyond one inmate. Prison tablets are shared resources in close quarters. If explicit material is broadcast onto those devices, it can fuel extortion, spark violence between inmates, and erode the order that keeps both staff and prisoners safe. When guards saw what was happening, they shut the feed down immediately. Some look at this behavior and see a young woman suffering a psychological break. They argue that a teenager sentenced to die in a concrete box will eventually act out just to feel something, anything, even if it means sacrificing the only connections she has to the outside world. They point to the isolation, the boredom, the crushing weight of a life sentence, and they ask what anyone would do in her place. But others look at the documented violations and see something else. They remember the 100 miles per hour. They remember the 100% throttle. They remember the 5 seconds of acceleration with no brakes. And they see the same pattern. A person who makes choices without considering consequences. The truth may lie somewhere between those 2 readings. Or it may be simpler than either side wants to admit. What is not up for debate is what these violations mean for her future. When you are serving 15 years to life, your conduct file is your only resume for the parole board. Every guilty finding is a line item in a permanent record that will be reviewed by people who have never met her, never heard her side, and never watched her grow up. They will see the contraband, the unauthorized medication, the explicit video visits, the defiance, and they will ask one question. Has this person shown she can follow the rules of a civilized society? Right now, the answer written in her file is no. If she ever wants to walk out of that reformatory, she has to prove she can adapt. She has to show she understands that actions have consequences. But the documented record suggests she is doing the opposite. And while all of this unfolds inside those prison walls, there are 2 families in Strongsville who wake up every morning to a permanent absence. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan are not abstract names in a case file. They were sons, brothers, friends. Their mothers do not care about prison tablets or video visitation bans. They do not worry about conduct reports or commissary privileges. They care about the gravestones they visit. They care about the years their children never got to live. To watch the person responsible for those deaths make headlines for breaking prison rules instead of quietly serving her time must be a pain that words cannot measure. The loss of those 2 young men is the gravity that holds this entire story together. The video ban was only the beginning. Because the official logs show that Shirilla's defiance did not stop at explicit video calls or contraband. It bled into the most sacred protocol inside a prison. The one procedure that exists to guarantee no one goes missing and no one escapes. She was out of place during a mandatory cell count. In a maximum security prison, that is not a minor mistake. It is a direct threat to the entire facility. When the numbers do not match, every guard, every inmate, and every door goes into lockdown. One person out of place punishes hundreds. Searches intensify. Tensions spike. The entire block grinds to a halt until every body is accounted for. And according to the official logs, this was not an isolated incident. Mackenzie Shirilla was documented refusing direct orders during counts, refusing to stand where officers told her to stand, and refusing to maintain basic cleanliness in her housing unit. These are not the actions of someone quietly adapting to a life sentence. These are the actions of someone who still believes the rules do not apply to her. If you want the unfiltered truth behind the headlines, hit like and subscribe to CrimeDive Network right now. The contrast between what her family says and what the state records show could not be starker. Her mother has spoken publicly and posted online, painting a picture of a young woman who is misunderstood, trapped in a nightmare, simply trying to survive a system that has already decided she is guilty. But the official logs do not read like a story of survival. They read like a pattern of institutional defiance that has only deepened with time. 36% conduct reports. 32 guilty findings. That is not a string of bad luck. That is a choice, repeated over and over. In recorded jail calls obtained by media outlets, that disconnect becomes even more disturbing. Her mother did not counsel remorse. She did not encourage her daughter to accept responsibility or consider the weight of what two families had lost. Instead, she told Shirilla that the families of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were, in her words, evil people. She advised her daughter not to think about their impact statements, not to let their grief penetrate her defense, not to let their pain become her burden. As a parent, the instinct to protect your child is primal. But those calls reveal something more troubling than maternal loyalty. They reveal a pattern of denial so complete that it extends to the very moment of the crash. In those same recorded conversations, prosecutors presented evidence that Shirilla asked from her hospital bed whether they could tell police she had a seizure. That was not a medical question. That was a cover-up, asked before she even knew the full extent of what the event data recorder had captured. The calls also revealed that Shirilla and her mother developed a coded secret language, adding extra syllables to words in an apparent attempt to evade detection by jail monitoring systems. They were not having honest conversations about what had happened, or why two young men were dead. They were strategizing. They were constructing a narrative. And that strategy continued even after she was convicted and sent to the Ohio Reformatory for Women. The official conduct reports tell their own story. Beyond the contraband and the explicit video visits documented in her file, guards logged multiple instances where Shirilla was out of place during mandatory counts. In prison, the count is sacred. Every living person must be accounted for. If one inmate is missing, the facility assumes the worst. Escape, violence, hostage. The entire block locks down until the discrepancy is resolved. Shirilla's documented refusal to comply with these protocols did not just put her at risk. It put every other inmate and every guard on edge. It created tension across the housing unit. The logs also note repeated refusals to follow orders regarding housing unit cleanliness. She would not clean her area. She would not stand where instructed. She would not perform the basic tasks that every other inmate is expected to complete without argument. These are not complex rules. They are the baseline requirements of institutional life, and she was failing them repeatedly. Some look at this pattern and see a teenager who cannot process the finality of her sentence. Ohio prison policy requires able-bodied inmates to work. The system does not allow lifers to sit in a cell collecting violations while the hours crawl by. The administration's response to her defiance was structural. They assigned mandatory labor, putting her under constant supervision, surrounding her with the noise and physical exhaustion of institutional routine. In Ohio, inmates typically earn minimal wages for this work, sometimes just enough to cover basic hygiene items and commissary snacks. The message is unmistakable. If she cannot handle the silence of her cell without creating chaos, the state will fill her time with forced structure and physical demand. An exhausted inmate has less energy to alter uniforms, hide contraband, or argue with officers during evening count. Whether that approach breaks her cycle of rebellion, or simply fuels deeper resentment, is an open question that only time will answer. But while she was inside fighting the daily grind of prison rules, her last real chance at freedom was dying on a technicality. Her defense team had been fighting for a new trial, arguing that the bench trial was flawed and that she deserved to present her case to a jury. On June 23, 2026, the Ohio Supreme Court issued its final word. They refused to review her appeal. The reason was staggering. Her attorneys had missed the statutory filing deadline by exactly 1 day. Because 2024 was a leap year, the calendar contained 366 days. Her lawyers filed on what the court determined was the 366th day. 1 day late, one administrative error, and the Supreme Court shut the door completely. Justice Patrick Davion dissented, arguing that the court should have considered the merits of her case despite the delay. But the majority ruled that deadlines are not suggestions. The law is the law. Think about what that means. Her entire chance at a new trial, at a jury hearing her medical defense, at any possibility of walking free before 2037, evaporated because someone did not account for February 29th. The irony is almost unbearable. The prosecution proved she drove, with the accelerator pressed to the floor for 5 full seconds. 5 seconds of absolute precision ended 2 lives, and 1 day of miscalculation ended her last legal hope. While lawyers argued over calendar days and filing deadlines, the families of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were marking another year without their sons. They do not get appeals. They do not get to file new motions when the grief becomes too heavy. They do not get a hearing to reconsider their loss. Dominic was 20 years old. Davion was 19. Their mothers visit graves instead of courtrooms. Their fathers wake up to silence instead of phone calls. Their siblings grow up with photographs instead of brothers. To watch the person responsible for that permanent loss make headlines for prison conduct violations and legal technicalities must be a cruelty that compounds with every news cycle. The pain they carry does not have a parole date. It does not get reduced for good behavior. It does not expire. And now that the appeals are over, Shirilla's reality is fixed. Every conduct report, every guilty finding, every documented refusal is being placed into a permanent file that the parole board will open in October 2037. She will be in her early 30s. She will sit in a room and ask strangers to let her go home. And those strangers will see the crash data. They will see the 100 miles per hour. They will see the 5 seconds of full throttle with no brakes. They will see the judge's words calling her act deliberate and purposeful. And then they will see 32 guilty conduct violations from her first years behind bars. They will see explicit video visits. They will see contraband. They will see a pattern of defiance that started the moment she arrived and continued through her 20s. The court called her Act Hell on wheels. Her prison file calls her non-compliant and disruptive. Together, those 2 records form a wall that will be extraordinarily difficult to climb. The question now is what she does with the time she has left. Some inmates, when their legal options disappear and the full weight of a life sentence settles in, break completely. They stop trying. They give in to the chaos because they believe they have nothing left to lose. Others find a different kind of survival. They follow the rules not because they believe in them, but because they understand that the only power they have left is the power to build a record that might one day convince a board to show mercy. Shirilla stands at that fork. The unsealed logs show she has chosen rebellion so far. But the next decade will write the chapter that matters most. And when that parole board finally opens her file, they will not see intentions. They will see patterns. And patterns do not lie. If you want to see where this story goes next, hit like and subscribe to CrimeDive Network. We dig deep, so you don't have to.